The frustration had been building for months. Photography wasn't just a job to me, it was an obsession, a way to pull meaning out of a world that often felt hollow. But no matter how many hours I poured into my work, the results never felt right anymore. I'd stare at my computer screen, scrolling through image after image, and all I could see was the same uninspired garbage I'd been churning out for weeks. No one cared about my portfolio. The likes on Instagram had stagnated. Clients stopped calling. My fingers itched for something new, something real, but every attempt to push myself ended in failure. It was a gray afternoon when I grabbed my camera bag and went out. I had no destination in mind, just a vague hope that maybe the city would offer something worth capturing. The overcast sky cast a dull light over everything, muting the edges of the buildings, the streets, the people. Nothing stood out. Nothing inspired. After an hour of wandering, I turned down an unfamiliar street. The pavement was cracked, weeds sprouting between the gaps, and most of the storefronts were boarded up or covered in faded graffiti. Ahead of me, a flickering neon sign caught my eye. Open, it read, the letters buzzing faintly against the silence of the street. The shop was tucked between two crumbling buildings, its windows smudged with grime. I hesitated, wondering why I'd never noticed it before, but curiosity pushed me forward. The door creaked as I stepped inside, a bell jingling overhead. The air was thick, stale, carrying a faint metallic tang that made my throat tighten. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with junk. Chipped plates, old tools, dusty books stacked haphazardly. It smelled of mildew and disuse, and yet there was a strange pull to the place, like it was waiting for someone to find it. My eyes scanned the cluttered aisles until something caught my attention near the back of the store. It sat in a scratched glass display case, tilted slightly to one side as if it had been carelessly placed there. A camera. It wasn't like anything I'd seen before. The body was covered in black leather, cracked and worn, its edges fraying with age. Brass fittings gleamed faintly beneath the layer of dust, etched with strange, swirling patterns. The lens was surprisingly clean, its surface free of scratches or smudges. I couldn't explain why, but I felt drawn to it. My hand hovered over the glass, my chest tightening with a strange mix of anticipation and unease. "How much for the camera?" I asked, my voice breaking the silence. The shopkeeper appeared behind the counter without a sound. She was small, hunched, her skin pale and papery. Cloudy eyes fixed on me, unblinking. $10, she said flatly, her voice dry like brittle leaves. "No refunds." "Does it work?" "It works." She didn't smile. I hesitated, the weight of her gaze pressing down on me. The carvings on the camera seemed to twist in the dim light, the shapes almost alive. For a moment, I thought I felt the faint hum of something beneath my skin, like static electricity. $10, huh? I pulled a crumpled bill from my pocket and handed it over. The shopkeeper's fingers brushed mine as she took the money, cold and dry as paper. The camera was heavier than I expected when she slid it across the counter. The leather was warm against my palms, the brass carvings rough under my fingertips. For a second, I thought I felt it vibrate faintly, like a heartbeat. "Good luck," the shopkeeper muttered, her voice low and distant as I turned to leave. Back in my apartment, I set the camera on the table and stared at it. The warm light from the window cast long shadows across the room, the brass fittings glinting like they were alive. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me, waiting for me to do something. I cleaned it carefully, wiping away the layers of grime and dust. As I worked, I noticed details I hadn't seen before. The carvings on the brass weren't just patterns. They were symbols, jagged and sharp, their edges intertwining in ways that felt deliberate. They made my stomach twist when I looked at them too long, but I couldn't stop. Once the camera was clean, I loaded a roll of film, winding it carefully into place. The mechanisms felt solid, smooth, as if it had been meticulously maintained despite its age. When I clicked the shutter for the first time, a soft vibration hummed through the camera, almost imperceptible, but enough to make my fingers tingle. I took a few test shots around the apartment. My desk, the cracked paint above the kitchen sink, the view of the street below through my grimy window. Each click of the shutter sent a small thrill through me, a satisfaction I hadn't felt in months. When the photos developed, I sat back in my chair, stunned. The images were gorgeous. The light and shadow played against each other perfectly, the textures sharp and vivid. It was as if the camera had captured something more than just the scene, like it had drawn out an essence, something that existed beyond what my eyes could see. But one photo stood out. It was the shot of my desk. Everything looked normal at first glance. The scattered notebooks, the coffee mug, the faint glow from the window. But when I looked closer, I saw it. A single strand of long black hair curled delicately across the handle of the mug. My breath caught in my throat. My hair was short. I lived alone. For a long time, I stared at the photo, trying to come up with an explanation. Maybe it had blown in from outside. Maybe I hadn't noticed it when I was cleaning. Maybe... I shook my head, setting the photo down carefully on the desk. It was nothing. It had to be nothing. The next day, the photo of the coffee mug with the hair still lingered in my mind. I told myself it wasn't important, that it had to be some random coincidence. Hair was everywhere, wasn't it? Even if I didn't notice it. But the way it curled, the way it was so clearly in focus against the handle of the mug, unsettled me. I found myself studying it throughout the morning, turning it over in my hands, trying to see if there was something I was missing. Eventually, I shoved it into the drawer of my desk. I didn't have time for this nonsense. By the afternoon, the clouds outside had darkened, and a soft drizzle coated the windows. The gray, muted light gave the city a hazy glow that made me itch to shoot. Grabbing the camera, I headed out into the streets again, determined to push through my unease. I wandered without direction, snapping photos of anything that caught my eye. A rusted chain-link fence and the rain dripping from its jagged edges. A weathered fire escape climbing the side of an old building. The reflection of a cracked neon sign in a puddle on the pavement. The camera felt alive in my hands. Each click of the shutter sent a faint vibration through my fingers, as if it were responding to me. The heaviness I'd felt since yesterday seemed to lift, replaced by a strange and almost euphoric calm. When I returned to my apartment, I immediately developed the film. The photos were beautiful, better than anything I'd shot in months. The textures, the contrast, the eerie glow of the rainy streets. It was all there. But as I sifted through the images, my stomach tightened. She was in one of them. The shot of the fire escape, which I'd framed so carefully to catch the light dripping off the railings, wasn't empty anymore. A figure stood at the base of the building, blurred and faint, but unmistakable. Her head was tilted slightly to the side, her long black hair spilling down her shoulders like a veil. I couldn't see her face, but her presence was undeniable. My first thought was that someone had wandered into the frame without me noticing. But the longer I stared at the photo, the more impossible it seemed. Her outline wasn't natural, it was wrong, too sharp and too soft all at once, as if she didn't belong in the same space as the rest of the image. I set the photo aside, swallowing the unease clawing at my chest. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe it was nothing. The photos kept coming. Every time I developed a role, she was there. Not always in the same place, not always in focus, but always there. A shadow behind a lamppost. a figure reflected in the window of a diner. Each time I saw her, she was closer. I started taking photos at random, desperate to understand what was happening. I shot the alley outside my apartment, the empty street beyond. When the film developed, I stared at the prints with shaking hands. The alley was empty in the first frame, just the cracked pavement and the faint glow of a streetlight. In the second frame, a shadow stretched across the wall. No source, no figure to cast it. Just the long, spindly outline of a body leaning against the bricks. The third frame was worse. She was there now, standing in the shadows at the edge of the alley. Her hair hung across her face, obscuring it completely, but her posture made it clear she was staring directly at me. I told myself to stop. Stop shooting. Stop developing. Stop looking. But the camera wouldn't let me. Every time I tried to put it down, I felt its weight pulling at me, tugging at my thoughts. My dreams were filled with the soft click of its shutter, the strange jagged symbols etched into its brass casing, and the whispers began. They started at night, faint and distant, like someone speaking just out of earshot. At first, I thought it was the neighbors, their muffled voices drifting through the thin walls of my apartment. But the whispers didn't fade. They didn't belong to the neighbors. I lay awake in the dark, straining to hear. The sounds didn't form words, but they carried meaning, crawling into my mind like insects. When I finally drifted into a restless sleep, I dreamed of her. She was standing at the foot of my bed, her head tilted, her hair obscuring her face. The whispers grew louder, swelling into a low hum that vibrated through my chest. I woke gasping, the sheets twisted around me. The camera was sitting on my desk, its lens pointed toward me. The next morning, I found a photo I hadn't taken. It was on my desk, just sitting there, waiting for me to notice it. My stomach lurched as I picked it up, my fingers trembling. It was a photo of me. I was asleep in the frame, my body curled on the mattress, and the faint glow of the streetlight outside casting shadows across the room. She was there, standing beside the bed. Her hands hung limp at her sides, her hair a curtain hiding her face. I turned to look at the desk, the camera sitting motionless, its carvings catching the morning light. The humming started again, low and rhythmic, pulsing through my palms when I picked it up. I couldn't ignore it anymore. She wasn't just an anomaly in the photos. She was real, or at least as real as anything else around me. The whispers didn't stop now. They followed me from room to room, low and insistent, barely audible, but always there, pressing against the edges of my mind. I tried to distract myself by going back to my usual photography haunts, walking the streets of the city with the camera slung over my shoulder. The day was overcast, the air damp with the threat of rain. I wandered into an old industrial yard where these skeletons of rusted machines jutted out from cracked concrete, their surfaces overgrown with moss. I clicked the shutter, framing shots carefully, trying to focus on the texture of corroded metal, the way the light scattered through broken windows. The act of capturing the scenes offered a brief reprieve, a way to steady my thoughts. The reprieve didn't last. When I developed the film later that evening, I braced myself. I already knew what I'd find. She was in every frame. The first image showed her standing in the distance, her silhouette barely visible through the grime on the factory windows. In the next, she was closer, her head tilted to one side as if she were studying me. The final photo made me drop the print. She was standing directly in front of the camera, her face taking up most of the frame. Her hair still obscured her features, but something glinted in the shadows, faint but unmistakable. Her teeth. They were sharp, jagged, and stained with something dark. I backed away from the prints, my heart pounding. I tried to convince myself to stop taking photos. That would be the logical thing to do, wouldn't it? To cut myself off from the camera entirely, to lock it away and let the film run dry. But the camera wouldn't let me. Every time I tried to leave it alone, my thoughts drifted back to it, pulled like a compass needle drawn to magnetic north. When I passed the desk, my fingers itched to pick it up, to feel the weight of it in my hands, the vibration that buzzed faintly beneath its surface. I started shooting without thinking, my movements automatic. I photographed the dim corners of my apartment, the empty streets outside, the shadows cast by flickering streetlights. The photos began to change. At first, they were small, subtle differences. Objects I didn't recognize appeared in the frames, a chair I didn't own, a vase I'd never seen. In one image, the wall behind my bed was cracked, the plaster crumbling away to reveal jagged shapes beneath. The changes grew stranger. I shot a series of photos of my hallway, the light catching the worn carpet, and the peeling paint on the walls. The developed prints showed a door at the end of the hallway, one that didn't exist in real life. It was old, the wood splintered, with a rusted handle hanging at an angle. In the next photo, the door was open. The whispers grew louder. They filled the silence of my apartment, swelling in the dark hours of the night when sleep eluded me. I tried covering my ears, blasting music through headphones, but nothing worked. The sound crawled beneath my skin, pressing into the soft spaces of my mind. I started seeing her out of the corner of my eye. When I turned on the bathroom light, I caught a glimpse of her standing behind me in the mirror. She was gone when I spun around, but the cold, suffocating pressure of her presence lingered. Once, while sitting at my desk, I felt something brush against the back of my neck, light and cold, like strands of hair grazing my skin. The nights were the worst. One night, I woke to the sound of the camera clicking. My room was pitch black except for the faint red glow of the alarm clock. My chest tightened as I sat up, the sheets tangled around me. The camera was at the foot of the bed, its lens pointed directly at me. My pulse thundered in my ears as I turned on the light. The camera hadn't moved, but something was wrong. My breath caught in my throat as I noticed the floor around the bed was covered in photos. They were all of me. The first showed me sleeping, my body twisted beneath the blankets, my face slack and pale. The second captured the moment I sat up in bed, my expression frozen in shock. In the third photo, she was standing beside me, her head tilted, her hair cascading over her face. I tried to destroy the camera the next morning. I grabbed a hammer from the kitchen and brought it down on the leather casing with all the force I could muster. The impact jarred my arm, sending a sharp jolt up to my shoulder. When I looked down, the camera was untouched. The hammer's head had cracked clean in half, the metal splintering like glass. I threw it into the bathtub and set it on fire, watching as the flames licked at the leather casing. The fire burned for a moment before flickering out, leaving the camera unharmed. I hurled it out of the window, listening for the crash as it hit the street below. But when I turned back to the apartment, it was sitting on the desk again, its lens gleaming in the dim light. I couldn't get rid of it. And worse, I didn't want to anymore. The camera wouldn't let me go. I told myself I had to understand it, to figure out what it was or where it came from. Maybe if I knew, I could find a way to stop whatever was happening. I pulled out my laptop and started researching antique cameras, sifting through countless images and descriptions, but none of them looked quite like mine. The carvings on the brass fittings were unique, too intricate to be decorative, but they didn't match anything in the design catalogs I found. Hours passed, my frustration mounting, until I stumbled on an old forum buried deep in the search results. The thread was decades old, its last reply dated years before I even owned a camera. The title caught my attention: The Curse of the Shutter. The posts were fragmented, filled with half-formed thoughts and cryptic warnings. One user described a camera that seemed similar to mine: leather casing, ornate brass carvings, but the details were inconsistent. Another mentioned a woman appearing in their photos, always in the background, her face obscured. One reply stood out: "It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to her. Don't let her too close. If she touches you, it's over." The words chilled me to the bone. I scrolled further, desperate for more, but the forum went dead after that. No more replies or explanations. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. The carvings, the warmth of the leather, the hum I felt every time I touched it. I grabbed the camera and studied it closely, tracing my fingers over the jagged symbols. They felt rough under my touch, almost sharp. A memory surfaced, unbidden. The shopkeeper's eyes, cloudy and cold. Her voice flat when she handed it over. No refunds. It was the first time I'd thought about her since I bought the camera. Something about her words stuck in my mind now, like they were hiding something I hadn't noticed before. I couldn't sit still anymore. The shop was darker than I remembered. The neon sign outside still flickered faintly, but the inside seemed drained of light. Dust hung heavy in the air, and the shelves looked emptier. The clutter diminished somehow. The shopkeeper sat behind the counter, her face as blank as ever. "You're back," she said, her voice as dry as the first time I'd heard it. I set the camera down on the counter. "What is this?" She didn't look at it. Her eyes stayed fixed on me, unblinking. "You want it," she said simply. "That's not what I asked." Her lips twisted into something that might have been a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "It's hers now." My stomach turned. "Who is she?" The shopkeeper's expression didn't change. "She's always been there. You just brought her closer." The weight of her words hit me like a punch to the chest. My mind raced, trying to parse what she meant, but the shopkeeper was already standing, her movements slow and deliberate. She reached under the counter, pulling out a small box. "Take this," she said, setting it in front of me. "What is it?" Her gaze bore into me, heavy and unrelenting. "You'll need it soon." The box was small and unassuming, the wood scratched and faded with age. I carried it back to my apartment, my thoughts spiraling in 1,000 directions. When I opened it, I found a stack of old photographs, their edges yellowed and curling. They weren't mine, but they felt familiar somehow, like they belonged to the camera. The first photo was of a man sitting at a desk, his face gaunt and hollow. He was staring at the camera, his eyes wide with fear. In the second photo, the same man was standing, his back turned, the woman behind him. Her hair hung in thick curtains, her hands stretched toward him, her fingers impossibly long. The final photo showed the room empty, the chair toppled over. My chest tightened as I flipped through the rest of the stack. Each set of photos told a similar story, different people, different places, but always the same ending. The woman got closer and they disappeared. I slammed the box shut, my hands trembling. The camera sat on the desk, its lens gleaming faintly in the dim light. I started noticing new sounds in the apartment, footsteps that weren't mine, the creak of the floorboards when I was sitting perfectly still. The whispers were louder now, almost words, though they never formed anything I could understand. They felt closer, more immediate, like someone standing just behind me. When I tried to sleep, I felt her there. I didn't need to look to know she was at the foot of the bed, her head tilted, her hair hanging in uneven strands. The air grew colder, heavy with a metallic scent that made it hard to breathe. The nightmares were constant. In one, I was holding the camera, the weight of it dragging my arms down. The woman was standing in front of me, her face hidden, but her presence filled the room. I tried to raise the camera to take a photo, but my hands wouldn't move. Her head tilted further, her hair shifting just enough to reveal the edges of her grin. I woke gasping, my chest heaving. The camera sat on the bedside table, its lens pointed toward me. The boundaries between waking and dreaming were gone. Every moment felt like the edge of a nightmare, with no distinction between what was real and what was her. The camera demanded more. I couldn't fight it anymore. My hands moved toward it on their own, fingers brushing the worn leather casing, feeling the faint hum that pulsed through its surface. The sensation wasn't just physical. It crawled through my mind, pulling me deeper into something I couldn't name. I started shooting again. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. The first photo I took was of the hallway outside my apartment. The dim light from the fixture above cast long, uneven shadows across the floor. When the image developed, I felt my throat tighten. The hallway in the photo wasn't mine. The light was dimmer, colder, and the walls were covered in scratches, deep gouges that raked across the surface. At the end of the hallway stood a door, splintered and warped, its handle rusted and jagged. In the next photo, the door was open. I shot the living room next, the camera trembling in my hands. I couldn't stop myself, even as my heart pounded in my chest. The room felt wrong, darker than it should have been. The air heavy with the scent of damp earth. When the film developed, the photo showed her. She was in the corner of the room, her figure partially obscured by the shadows. Her head was tilted, her hair falling in uneven strands across her shoulders. This time her hands were visible, hanging limp at her sides, her fingers impossibly long and claw-like. I backed away from the photo, but my legs hit the edge of the desk. The camera buzzed faintly against my palms, its weight heavier than before. The nights grew worse. The whispers were constant now, no longer faint but pressing, intrusive, filling my ears even when I covered them with my hands. The words were still fragmented, but they carried meaning, burrowing into my mind like a parasite. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her. She stood in the doorway of my bedroom, her outline sharp against the darkness. Her head tilted further than any neck should be able to bend, her hair swaying as though caught in a breeze that didn't exist. When I finally drifted into a restless sleep, I dreamed of the photos. They were endless, scattered across the floor of my apartment, the images shifting as I picked them up. Her figure grew closer with each one, her face obscured but her presence overwhelming. The final photo always showed the same thing, me staring into the camera, her hands wrapped tightly around my neck. The camera began to act on its own. I'd leave the room for a moment, and when I returned, fresh photos would be waiting for me on the desk. One showed me sitting on the couch, my head in my hands, the shadows around me too thick to be natural. Another showed the bathroom mirror, my reflection blurred, her figure standing just behind me. The worst was of my bed. I was asleep in the photo, twisted in the sheets, my face pale and slack. Her hands were reaching for me from the edge of the frame, her fingers curling like claws. I tried to escape. I drove to the edge of the city, the camera locked in the trunk of my car. The sun was setting, casting the landscape in deep oranges and reds, but I didn't feel the warmth. The river was sluggish, its surface dark and unbroken. I hurled the camera into the water with all the strength I could muster, watching as it disappeared beneath the surface. For a moment, I felt relief. When I got home, the camera was waiting for me on the kitchen table. The note was there the next morning. It wasn't long, just 3 words, scrawled in jagged handwriting on a scrap of paper. One more photo. I stared at the note for what felt like hours. The air in the apartment was stifling, the walls closing in around me. My fingers brushed against the camera's leather casing, and the hum surged through me stronger than ever. It wasn't a request. It was a command. The note sat on the table, its 3 words burning into my mind. My body moved without thought, hands trembling as I lifted the camera. The hum beneath its leather casing buzzed louder now, resonating in my chest, dragging me forward. One more photo. I cleared the furniture from the living room, creating an open space lit by the pale gray light spilling in from the window. Shadows clung to the corners of the room, their shapes too deep, too sharp, shifting as I moved. The tripod felt impossibly heavy as I set it up, each adjustment slow and deliberate. My breath came in shallow gasps as I loaded the film. The camera's weight pressed into my hands, grounding me, holding me in place. The air thickened, heavy with a metallic scent, like rust and damp earth. My skin prickled, the temperature dropping until I could see the faint puff of my breath. The camera was ready. The first photo clicked with a sound louder than it should have been. When I developed it, my knees buckled. She was there, standing in the corner of the room, her outline barely visible against the shadows. Her head was tilted to the side, her long black hair hanging in thick strands across her face. Her hands dangled at her sides, her fingers unnaturally long, tipped with jagged nails. I didn't want to take another. My hands moved on their own. The second photo showed her closer. She stood behind me now, her hair brushing against my shoulder. I could almost feel its cold, damp strands against my skin. Her posture was wrong, her body leaning forward in a way that made my stomach twist. The third photo sent a scream ripping from my throat. Her face filled the frame. Her eyes were hollow pits, black and endless, pulling me into their void. Her mouth was stretched wide, too wide, her lips curling back to reveal jagged, broken teeth. A low, guttural sound escaped her. Though it didn't come from the photo, it came from the room around me. I backed away, my chest heaving, but the camera buzzed louder, pulling at my thoughts, dragging me forward. I raised it again. This time, the lens pointed directly at my face. The shutter clicked, the flash blinding me for a moment. My hands shook as I developed the final photo, my breath catching in shallow gasps. Her hands were wrapped around my throat. They gripped tightly, her nails digging into my skin, leaving deep red marks. I stared at the image and unable to tear my eyes away. The burn of her fingers began to creep across my neck, real and tangible. My breath hitched. The marks appeared on my skin in real time, raw and vivid, spreading like fire. Her grip tightened, though I couldn't see her, couldn't feel her presence except in the crushing force, squeezing the air from my lungs. I clawed at my throat, stumbling backward. The room spun, the corners collapsing inward as my vision darkened. The last thing I saw was the camera, its lens gleaming, capturing everything. The silence after her grip faded was suffocating. I lay crumpled on the floor, my body cold and lifeless. Yet I wasn't gone. Not completely. I felt myself being pulled, not by hands, but by something deeper. Something that dug into the essence of who I was and tore me apart. My vision blurred, the edges of the room twisting and darkening as I was dragged from my body. The hum of the camera surged, no longer faint but deafening, consuming me in its resonance. When I opened my eyes, or whatever was left of them, I wasn't in the room anymore. I was inside the camera. The first thing I felt was pain. Not mine, not entirely. It was theirs. hundreds of lives, each ripped apart in unimaginable ways. Their memories clawed at me, a torrent of screaming, crying, and begging that drowned out my own thoughts. I saw flashes of their faces. A young man cradling his bleeding throat. A woman's hands bound as the camera's lens reflected her twisted fear. A child sobbing as the woman emerged from the shadows. Her presence was here too, wrapped around me like a shroud. I could feel her laughter, sharp and cutting, echoing through my mind. And I knew then that I had taken her place. I inherited her. Her memories, her rage, her hunger. It wasn't just the pain I felt, it was the power. I saw them all, the victims, the ones who had dared to pick up the camera, each consumed by their own ambition or curiosity. They hadn't deserved mercy. They had been weak, just like I had been. The fear they felt, the terror she had inflicted on them, filled me with a twisted satisfaction. I understood her now. I understood why she had smiled that way, why her teeth gleamed so brightly. They weren't hers. They were mine now. The camera hummed again, its carvings glowing faintly into the darkness. The room came into focus, and I could see myself, or rather, the shell I'd left behind. My body lay on the floor, twisted and limp, my face locked in a frozen scream. Around me, the photos remained, scattered like a breadcrumb trail of my descent. But something was different now. The woman was gone. In every image, the frames were empty of her presence. The eerie shadows, the claw-like hands, the blackened void of her eyes, they had vanished. The photos were just photos again, a fire escape, a deserted alley, my desk bathed in soft light. To anyone else, they would look normal. My body was found 3 days later. A welfare check, they called it. The landlord had been alerted by a neighbor complaining about the smell. When the police broke down the door, they found me exactly as I'd fallen, cold, stiff, my hands still clutching at the invisible marks on my throat. The photos were gathered into neat piles by the officers who barely spared them a glance. None of them noticed anything strange about the images. They saw what they wanted to see. The camera was set aside, unremarkable except for its age. By the time they were done cataloging the scene, one of the officers had pocketed it. "Maybe I'll donate it," he muttered to himself. "Or get rid of it. No point in keeping this junk." He never noticed the faint vibration beneath his hands. The thrift store was the same as ever, its dimly lit aisles packed with forgotten relics. Dust clung to the shelves, undisturbed except for the faint trails of new arrivals. The camera sat in the glass case near the counter, its leather casing polished, its brass fittings gleaming faintly. The carvings seemed sharper now, their edges catching the weak light like tiny, jagged blades. The bell above the door jingled softly, announcing a new customer. A man wandered in, his gaze drifting lazily across the shelves before settling on the case. He stopped, leaning closer. The camera caught the light just right, its lens gleaming invitingly. "How much for this?" he asked, his voice curious. The shopkeeper glanced up, her cloudy eyes unblinking as they met his. $10, she said. "No refunds."